Only a handful of players can recall playing the original Pixel Gun world, with most people not even knowing of its existence. Despite lasting only a year, Pixel Gun World would leave a long-lasting impression far larger than anyone imagined. So how did such a short-lived game leave a legacy that can still be seen over a decade later? Pixel Gun World wasn't a failed port of Pixel Gun 3D. In many ways, it was far from a failure. As you'll see, the key differences that once reeled players in might have been what ultimately led to its demise. June 10th, 2016. It's the first week of summer break for most of the world, which means more than ever people are waking up and immediately logging on to Pixel Gun World. Today's a bit different. This would be the 1-year mark since the launch of the official beta. However, the players that did log on never knew they would be witnessing the final moments of the game. In order to understand why Pixel Gun World was able to leave such a significant mark, despite the short lifespan, we first need to take a step back. By 2015, Pixel Gun was finally competing with some of the largest names in mobile gaming. 2015 as a whole would impact more than just Pixel Gun. It would be what some people call the pinnacle. Minecraft content on YouTube was still pulling hundreds of thousands of views every day, and each mobile game headline seemed to blow the previous one out of the water. All of that combined meant Pixel Gun's growing player base would reach a level it had never seen before. While the community grew increasingly diverse, one request remained constant. Players wanted a PC version. Ironically, this request would reveal that one of Pixel Gun's biggest strengths was finally becoming one of its biggest limitations. As the game leaned towards the faster, more competitive aspect, players began asking themselves a simple question: how much better could Pixel Gun be with a mouse and keyboard? While the developers would never publicly address or even acknowledge the overwhelming number of requests for a dedicated PC port, behind the scenes they were working tirelessly on a completely brand new project, something no one expected from the company. Then on May 25th, 2015, the community finally got the answer they wanted. Relisoft would reveal their latest project. It wasn't quite what the community expected. This official announcement of the project made it apparent to the community that the one-to-one PC port was completely out of the picture. Rather, they would be releasing an entirely separate version for PC, going under the name Pixel Gun World. Despite this being the first confirmation of the project's development, the announcement left more questions than answers. Those questions wouldn't remain unanswered for very long, because 2 weeks later the closed beta would officially release. The initial beta testing group was extremely small, which meant there would be very few surviving archives of this era, while the coming months were relatively uneventful, with most of the updates focusing on general bug fixes. In December of 2015, Pixel Gun World would reach a point stable enough to finally let the community experience it. Countless YouTube videos were uploaded of the game from this time period, but most of them would be lost over time. However, the archived content allows us to see what exactly made Pixel Gun World so unique. Visually, Pixel Gun World looked nearly identical to the mobile version, using mostly the same maps and weapons, making Pixel Gun World feel familiar, despite it technically being a separate game. But past the first look is when the differences start to become much more obvious. One of the first differences players were met with had nothing to do with the maps or weapons. Unlike Pixel Gun 3D, where player-to-player communication is limited to individual lobbies, Pixel Gun World would completely replace that with the global chat room feature. This would be one of the biggest contributors to the much more noticeable sense of community. One of the biggest reasons for a PC port was to expand upon the pretty limited competitive aspect, which was seen in the reworked clan system, with the most aggressive competitive change we've ever seen in Pixel Gun, that being the controversial feature known as the Great Purge. This purge would occur daily, with the bottom 20 clans from the global leaderboard being permanently deleted. Despite the mixed community response regarding this feature, it undeniably raised the stakes, solving the issue of the competitive scene quickly becoming stale. A similar approach would be taken with the rank system, which now introduced a seasonal trophy system, allowing players to earn exclusive season cups. The map pool featured a handful of iconic maps from Pixel Gun 3D, but most importantly, 3 of the most visually appealing and unique Pixel Gun World exclusive maps. like Kung Fu Village, which takes place in an ancient Chinese village with the center of the map resembling a marketplace. Space Desert, which looks similar to the Arabian Dust map, however this map was based off the Mos Eisley spaceport from Star Wars. And finally, Isla de la Muerte, which translates to Island of Death, with 3 main areas like the Burning Fortress, the Skull Mountain featuring a cave inside, and the Pirate Shipwreck. This map was extremely detailed compared to every other map in Pixel Gun, making it undeniably the most recognizable map and staple of Pixel Gun World. Unfortunately, despite the clear attention to detail, these maps would never be seen outside of Pixel Gun World, which greatly reinforced that separate identity the developers were going for. At this point, it's clear the primary focus of the Pixel Gun World release was to make it clear that it wasn't the same as the mobile counterpart, and was an all-around improved and established version of the game. As you saw, the way the developers would go about this was through introducing assets and features that were exclusive to Pixel Gun World. Like I mentioned earlier, Pixel Gun World's influence would prove to outlive the game itself. June 21st, 2015, the 10.0 update would be released to the mobile side, as players eagerly opened the game to finally play the long-awaited third world of the campaign. Upon loading into the first swamp level, one thing became extremely obvious. This enemy looked oddly familiar. But before jumping to any conclusions, most players brushed it off, and played through the rest of the levels. It would become impossible to ignore the very clearly reused assets from Pixel Gun World. Aside from the initial Ent enemy seen in the swamp level, the castle and final level would showcase 2 more reused enemies from Pixel Gun World. At the end of the day, most of the community disregarded this, not thinking much of it, assuming it was just a weird one-off occurrence. Just a few months later, another update would be released, now the 10.2 update. The developers would announce new weapons being added. Unlike last time, the community would instantly recognize these reused assets, with the Space Rifle, Space Blaster, Laser Crossbow, Kaboom, Red Twins, and Anti-Hero Rifle, all being added at once to the mobile version. This would be one of the most known and obvious cases of Pixel Gun World's influence reaching outside of the game. From the perspective of the community, Pixel Gun World seemed like it was going to be that final push the game needed for it to go mainstream. While that may have been the case at first, it quickly became obvious to the developers that maintaining this ambitious identity was far from sustainable. In most cases, games have their plug pulled as a result of a low player count or just generally not being positively perceived. However, this case stands out, since it's clear that Pixel Gun World was viewed and pretty widely accepted as the future of Pixel Gun. But unfortunately, this public image the Pixel Gun company was holding up was slowly falling apart. To better understand what was going wrong behind the scenes, you have to realize that there's one more aspect we're yet to cover, which was the business model. On one hand, Pixel Gun 3D was generating a majority, if not all, of its revenue through 2 main sources: in-game ads and in-app purchases. Exact numbers on how much each of these contributed to the game's overall earnings have remained private to this day. Regardless, these 2 sources were clearly what kept the mobile game afloat financially. There were no ads that filled your screen in between games. In fact, one of the 2 main currencies would be removed entirely. Every day, Pixel Gun World made the company question why they were funding a project that seemingly did more damage than good to their finances. A financial parasite. Despite the monetary losses, the community was happier than ever. But at what cost? June 10th, 2016. It's the first week of summer break. More than ever, people are waking up with one thing on their mind: playing Pixel Gun World. This is how things have been for the last few months. However, something was different today. This would mark the 1-year anniversary of Pixel Gun World's launch. Just like any other day, the community would continue grinding for their clans. The forums would remain active, with members discussing the game and its anniversary. But behind the scenes, all hell had broken loose. Unbeknownst to the community, the last few months have been some of the most agonizing for the Pixel Gun World team. Deadlines weren't being met, earnings were at an all-time low. It seemed that each day that passed, the threat of not only losing their job, but the project they spent the last year tirelessly working on, having its plug pulled, indefinitely. Despite the desperate efforts of the team to maintain this flawless public image, this would be the breaking point. "3:50 p.m. UTC. The staff would notify those who were in-game that in 10 minutes, the servers would be temporarily unavailable for the next 5 hours for a technical break. As promised, 10 minutes later at 4 p.m. UTC, the game servers would go offline. Players eagerly logged on to the official Pixel Gun World forum, talking with the community to pass the time, and trying to come up with a reason for the sudden 5-hour downtime. Was it a surprise update? Maybe a server failure? The community moderators and developers watched this all unfold in front of them. The day they dreaded for these past few months was finally here. The developers wanted to remain optimistic, even if they knew it wasn't the truth. Just 1 hour later, the forum servers would be met with the same fate as the game. It went dark one final time. To this day, very little is known about the shutdown of Pixel Gun World, and is often referred to as one of the strangest moments in Pixel Gun history. Why would they lie about it being a temporary shutdown? Did the developers even know this was a permanent shutdown? There's a never-ending list of unanswered questions regarding Pixel Gun World's extremely odd shutdown. Despite any of the optimistic or misleading comments made by the developer team, Pixel Gun World and its forum would never officially return. However, 6 years after the shutdown, in 2022, a fan-made project would be released. RobDev's project would provide a way to revisit the nostalgia of Pixel Gun World, but it served more as a time capsule than anything, since unfortunately one of the most important parts of the game's success could never be recreated, because it wasn't the content itself, but the community built around it. 10 years later, the same questions still remain. What went wrong? Why didn't it return? Is there more that we don't know? And why did they lie? Despite various weapons and enemies being used in the modern version of Pixel Gun 3D, and even a Steam release of the game, a truly separate and unique version would never be released. Today, Pixel Gun World remains abandoned, everything left just the way it was the day its plug was pulled, frozen in time forever. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like high quality videos about Pixel Gun 3D and its history, definitely hit that subscribe button for more content like this on your feed. And comment your favorite memory from Pixel Gun World. I'm honestly excited to see if anyone can find their old friends or clanmates from Pixel Gun World.